his parents could have inflicted these injuries. But no criminal charges have ever been brought. And 6 months ago, I was pleased when the Lord Advocate told me that she had instructed a new investigation by specialist prosecutors. She also said that a fatal accident inquiry might be held. So will the First Minister back my calls for that inquiry and ensure that every effort is made to secure justice for baby Jay?
First Minister.
On Mr Findlay's first point, I hope that my first answer to Mr Findlay gives him reassurance that I attach the greatest of significance to the voice of victims being heard within our criminal justice system. And if there are ways in which that needs to be strengthened, indeed we have legislation before Parliament to do exactly that. Indeed, in our former lives, Mr Findlay and I scrutinised that legislation together on the Criminal Justice Committee, and we were able to cooperate there. So perhaps we may be able to cooperate on some of these questions here. So I give him that assurance that we'll look at those points. And of course there is scope for the bill to be amended on the basis of the point that Mr Findlay raises. In relation to the tragic case in West Lothian, the Lord Advocate has made clear that there should be a renewed investigation on that point. The Crown determines whether or not the Crown will determine on the basis of police investigation what actions, if any, should be taken forward, and that is the proper role for the Crown to do so. And any question of a fatal accident inquiry again rests independently on the judgment of the Crown, and the Lord Advocate has made clear her position on that, and we will of course hear more from the Lord Advocate as the case is considered.
Thank you. Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by wishing you, everyone across this chamber and all the Parliament staff a very Merry Christmas and all the best for 2025, and say a special thank you to our emergency service personnel that will be working throughout the festive period. Presiding Officer, Scotland is in the middle of a housing emergency. While all of us here will wake up this Christmas morning to see the joy on our loved ones' faces, this year a record number of Scots will wake up without a home to call their own. Homelessness is at record levels. 10,000 children are living in temporary accommodation, and hundreds will be left to wake up in hostels, refuge centres and B&Bs. So can I ask John Swinney, is he still proud of his SNP government's record on housing?
First Minister.
First of all, so let me associate myself with Mr Sarwar's remarks and express my good wishes to you, Presiding Officer, for a happy Christmas, and to parliamentary staff, and to express my appreciation to those in the emergency services and our volunteer community who will be working, and our public services who will be working hard to keep everybody safe and supported during the Christmas break. In relation to the question of housing, I accept that the Government accepts that there is a housing emergency. We are not building enough houses. We've built more houses, more affordable houses per head of population in Scotland than in other parts of the United Kingdom, but we are not building enough, which is why the Government has significantly increased the housing budget for the next financial year by over £200 million. We will be spending, we've allocated in the budget £768 million, representing a 38% increase in the housing budget to help to build the housing that is required to meet the needs of people in Scotland. So the Government has a strong record on building houses, but we have a changing society that requires more house building, and the Government is putting the resources in place to make sure that can be the case.
Sarwar.
Thank you, President Officer. John Swinney is talking about correcting the mess his own government made, but actually this is about the people here and now. So let me give you one example of thousands. Miriam is a single working mum in Glasgow. Almost 2 years ago, Miriam and her 4 children were evicted after she complained about the mould and leaks that were affecting her children's health. She was forced to declare herself homeless, was put into temporary accommodation, an hour from her children's school, where she and her family had been living ever since. 5 people crammed into a 2-bedroom flat. And despite Miriam's efforts, her daughter, who dreamed of being a dentist, had her education so disrupted by the chaos that she missed out on her dream by just 1 mark. First Minister, the housing emergency, of course, has an immediate impact, but can't you see that it's also impacting the life chances and outcomes for our young people? So how can this government be proud of its record?
First Minister.
Well, I think it is important to look at the data and the evidence on this. So, in a period which we've lived through over the last 14 years of punishing austerity, and that's a financial context that Mr Sarwar and I actually agree about, because we both agree that the period of austerity has been incredibly damaging for the public infrastructure and the public fabric of our country and has significant social and economic implications. So he and I agree on that. And in that context, the Scottish Government has built 73% more affordable homes per head of population than in Wales, and 47% more affordable homes than compared to England since 2007. So that is the record of this government, and I will argue for that, because the government has actually, and the facts speak for themselves, the Scottish Government, against the prevailing tide of austerity, has built more affordable houses per head of population than any other part of the United Kingdom. Now, I accept that's not enough, which is why we've just increased the budget. It's why we've put in that commitment to make sure that we can encourage and motivate more house building to address the very issues that Mr Sarwar raises with me today.
Anna Sarwar.
The facts do speak for themselves. 10,000 children in Scotland are in temporary accommodation, a record high, and all the First Minister wants to do is point to other parts of the country rather than look at his own record of failure. And the truth is, this is a crisis years in the making. I would remind people, these are your constituents I'm talking about. Children in your own constituencies that are living in temporary accommodation.
Always through the chair, please.
The truth is, this crisis is years in the making. Miriam's heartbreaking story is just one example of thousands. On John Swinney's watch, house building down by 10%, the lowest number of affordable and private homes been built in more than a decade, and there are over 11,000 council houses lying empty. Every statistic, another example of a family failed and a future squandered. As Alison Watson from Shelter Scotland said, despite declaring a national housing emergency earlier this year, the Scottish Government has failed to get to grips with a deepening crisis. More than 10,000 children will wake up facing the trauma of homelessness this Christmas, the highest number on record. 10,000 children without a home to call their own on Christmas morning. So, First Minister, how many children will wake up homeless under this government next year?
First Minister.
President Officer, I agree with the objectives of Mr Sarwar of ensuring that children are not living in poverty. That is absolutely at the heart of my government's programme and at the heart of everything we are trying to do. On housing, I'm afraid it's not good enough for Mr Sarwar to dismiss the points of evidence that I am making. In a climate of austerity, the Scottish Government has built more houses than per head of population, affordable houses, than in any other part of the United Kingdom. Now, that is a simple statement of evidence of the commitment we have given to housing. In the budget proposition that we've put forward, £768 million is being allocated to the budget for housing, and as part of that, resources are available to tackle the issue of voids, which has currently been tackled during this financial year, to bring more properties into use by the use of government expenditure to support that activity. In addition to all of that, the government's budget is providing a record settlement for local authorities with a £1 billion increase in local authority funding to support services which will include homelessness services. Now, this is where we get to the crunch point. Because what we'll find out in a few weeks' time is whether Mr Sarwar is interested in a solution or whether Mr Sarwar is just interested in rhetoric. Because the government's budget is going to have to be voted for in this Parliament. And the people of this country have just had an insight into Mr Sarwar's rhetoric. We've seen the rhetoric of Mr Sarwar about waspy women, where with the Labour Party, before the election, promising big, bold action on the waspy women, and what the Labour Party has delivered is absolutely nothing whatsoever. So Mr Sarwar is in no position to come here and give any of his rhetoric unless he's prepared to vote for the government's budget and help to lift children out of poverty.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvie.
Presiding Officer, can I also wish you and all Parliament staff and members across the Chamber all the best for the festive season and a good new year. 2024, though, was the year when the Scottish Government had to admit that it's years behind schedule on climate. And in response, the SNP said that they would accelerate action with an energy strategy, a plan to cut car traffic, funding to help agriculture become climate friendly, and a new bill to get Scotland off the gas grid and roll out clean heating in homes across the country. So far, none of that has happened. That last action is urgent now, because if we get it right, it won't just cut emissions, it'll cut people's energy bills too. The Government said it would introduce that bill by the end of this year. Where is it?
First Minister.
So the Government's working on bringing forward legislative proposals in this respect, but Mr Harvie's characterisation of the Government's programme is not accurate and not representative. On a whole variety of issues, whether it is on transport, whether it is on agriculture, whether it's upon heating, whether it's about renewable energy, whether it's about measures to reduce carbon by investment in forestry and by investment in peatland restoration, the Government is taking forward the steps that are necessary to tackle climate action. We will do that as part of a sustained programme. It involves the underpinning of investment in the Government's budget of £4.9 billion to support those objectives, and we're determined to fulfil those commitments to Parliament.
Patrick Harvie.
Well, each of the specific examples I mentioned was promised earlier this year and hasn't yet happened. And the First Minister knows that the clean heat industry is only going to take off if the Government gives clarity and leadership. So any more delay on this bill is unacceptable. Trust in politics matters. We've just heard John Swinney rightly condemn the UK Government for breaching the trust of the WASPy women. But this question of trust applies to him too. The Scottish Government promised to accelerate climate action to make up for its record of failure, but it simply isn't happening. The first months of 2025 are going to be critical for Scotland's future efforts on climate. New carbon budgets, a new climate plan, decisions which are going to determine whether we succeed or fail for the next decade. How is anyone supposed to trust that the First Minister will do what needs to be done when we're still waiting for so many of the actions he promised?
First Minister.
I think it does come down to the delivery of actions. And that's what the Government is focused on. It's focused on getting on with these things. So, for example, let's take renewable energy, for example. Because of the policy certainty offered by this Government, we have essentially decarbonised the electricity network in Scotland by the shift to renewable energy. There are many other aspects of our policy agenda upon which we are delivering. Now, I've made it pretty clear that we don't all have to wait for new plans, new strategies. We've got lots and lots of these things. What's clear is the Government's commitment to climate action, to a programme of delivery, and that's what ministers are taking forward. And I look forward to engaging with Mr Harvie and his colleagues about how we can support that by passing the Government's budget, because none of what Mr Harvie is talking about will be achieved if the Government budget is not passed and the £4.9 billion that we plan to invest in climate action is able to be invested in that.
Thank you. Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking in response to the reported announcement that to ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will encourage the public not to buy puppies or dogs during the festive period, in light of the reported possibility that these may be the product of irresponsible breeders, including illegal puppy farms.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on the basis that a dog is for life, not just for Christmas, the Scottish Government works throughout the year with key stakeholders, including the Scottish SPCA, local authorities and other administrations, to raise awareness of the responsibilities of prospective dog owners in buying a pet safely. In particular, we point to the Scottish SPCA's Christmas campaign on this issue, and we would encourage prospective owners to consider rehoming a dog instead of buying a puppy. We welcome and support Christine Graham's efforts with the Welfare of Dogs Bill. It will help to emphasise to people to act responsibly when deciding to buy or take a dog into their lives and be responsible owners, ensuring the dog's welfare for as long as they have it.
Christine Graham.
Thank the First Minister for his answer. Will the First Minister take this opportunity to commend the responsible breeders and rescue centres which will not home dogs or indeed puppies or kittens over the festive period, as it's the last thing these need, the disturbance, the bright lights and noise as their first introduction to their new home? And that anyone who has concerns that puppies are being trafficked should report this to the police or the SSPCA. If you see a puppy online or you're buying it out of the back of a van in a car park, the public will have no idea where that puppy came from or the misery that brought its journey to that end.
First Minister.
I know and admire and respect the long interest that Christine Graham has taken in these issues, and I commend all of the wise advice that Christine Graham has put on the record for members of the public. I think all of the steps that Christine Graham has set out are valuable steps to make sure that individuals are purchasing pets in a responsible and sustained climate where there is the welfare of the animal has been assured and protected. And I think the advice of my colleague is very important at this time.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also voice my support for the Scottish SPCA's efforts to promote responsible pet purchases and commend the work of Christine Graham and Maurice Golden in their efforts, along with other agencies, to smash the smugglers. The public have an important role to play too, and because ferries are one of the key smuggling channels, especially through the port of Cairnryan, does the First Minister agree with me it's important passengers are aware of the suspicious activity and how to report it? But posters and social media efforts don't always reach everyone. So what more can the Scottish Government do to ensure more passengers receive that message?
First Minister.
Mr Whittle raises an important point, and the Government works closely with officials in the Northern Ireland Government and key agencies through the Pause for Thought puppy trafficking group to disrupt and target those involved in this trade. There are many collaborative actions that are taken between ourselves and the Government in Northern Ireland, and the multi-agency pet trade task force shares intelligence and targets those involved in illegal breeding and the smuggling of puppies. So I hope that gives Mr Whittle some assurance that there is active engagement between the Scottish Government and the Government of Northern Ireland, and also with the other administrations in the United Kingdom, to make sure that this issue is properly and fully addressed to the best of our ability.
Question number 5, Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking in response to the reported announcement that NHS Scotland's IT software supplier, INPS, has entered administration in light of concerns that this could leave GPs without the digital infrastructure to maintain electronic health records.
First Minister.
President Officer, I want to begin by assuring the Chamber that there is currently no impact to patient care or the availability of IT systems for GPs as a result of this announcement. Scottish Government officials are liaising with NHS National Services Scotland, who hold the national framework contract with NPS on behalf of NHS Scotland and the NPS administrators. NSS have established an incident management team and contingency planning is underway. The Royal College of General Practitioners, the British Medical Association, GP practices and health boards in Scotland have been fully appraised of the situation. Officials have also been engaged with counterparts across the 4 nations, with a further meeting due to take place tomorrow. This is an emerging situation. The company is now formally up for sale, and I anticipate the Cabinet Secretary will be able to provide a fuller update to Parliament in January.
Sandesh Gulhani.
A declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. The BMA has told me that the Scottish Government has not invested well in GP IT infrastructure. Hardware is out of date. We are using legacy software without support from software companies, and our systems in our Scottish GP surgeries are often designed for the English market, downgraded and shoehorned into our surgeries. The First Minister said there's currently no issues, but INPS supplies Vision, one of our most vital systems, and it's a disaster waiting and in the making, potentially leaving GPs unable to safely see patients. In fact, a GP in Orkney wrote to us with this exact concern. What will the First Minister do to ensure the integrity of our vital NHS IT infrastructure?
First Minister.
Well, the Government is focused on exactly that point, and that's why I indicated that there is an incident management team with contingency planning underway, and various of the relevant organisations that need to be advised about these issues are currently being advised. There is, of course, this technical capability within our GP practices already, and the Health Secretary will be actively engaged to make sure that our officials are doing everything they can to support the continued provision of that activity. But I come back to my key point, that there is currently no impact to patient care or the availability of IT systems for GPs as a result of this announcement.
Thank you. Question number 6, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what consideration the Scottish Government has given to what the potential impact might be on deaf and deaf-blind people of the termination of its contract with Contact Scotland BSL.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government wrote to the supplier of Contact Scotland BSL on the 4th of December, notifying them that their contract would come to an end on the 31st of March 2025 in accordance with its terms. First of all, I want to be clear that there will be no break in service for users of Contact Scotland BSL whilst we retender for the free service. We will work closely with BSL users in Scotland and the current supplier of Contact Scotland BSL to design this service to ensure that it best meets the needs of those who use it, raises awareness of the availability of the service, and therefore also increases the number of users.
Mark Griffin.
This does seem to be a change in direction from the Government, because in its letter to the existing service provider, they were informed that the contract would not be retendered. So I'm sure members in the gallery, deaf members across the country, will welcome the news that this service has to be retendered, which is different, as I say, from the information that I've received so far. So if that is a change in Government position, that is welcome, because I think we should put ourselves in the shoes of a deaf person. You imagine that you're not feeling well, you go to your GP and you're referred for further tests. You go to that consultant's appointment, you can't get an interpreter. Previously, before we had this service in place, they would often have to take family members. You imagine taking a teenage family member to interpret the devastating news that you could potentially receive. So this change in information is welcome from the Government, but I would ask the First Minister if he'll make sure that the deaf and deafblind community are fully consulted on what this new service will look like.
First Minister.
I give Mr Griffin that assurance, and I'm sorry if there has been an impression that there was to be no retendering of the service. I'll make sure that that is properly explored. I know the long-standing interest that Mr Griffin takes in these issues. He's given a very distinguished contribution to Parliament on these topics, and I want to make sure that the legitimate issues he raises are properly explored. So I give the assurance that there will be engagement with the BSL community, and if Mr Griffin wishes to raise any more material with me about this to seek further assurance, he knows that I'll happily engage with him about that question, as will ministers, to make sure that this service is available for all the legitimate reasons that he puts to me today.
Stephen Kerr.
What the First Minister has said in response to Mark Griffin. But Mark Griffin is right. In the correspondence the Scottish Government sent to the existing service provider, it says, and I quote, "Following ministerial agreement in November, the Scottish Government will not be retendering a BSL video relay service." So it says it very clearly in the letter. So will the First Minister now confirm that the service is not being defunded and that there will be no break or disruption to Contact Scotland BSL service as it is now operating?
First Minister.
In my earlier answer, I said, and I'll read it again, because it's printed and typed in front of me, so this information will have to be correct. And I'm becoming slightly uneasy with the frequency with which this question is getting put to me, that this wording better be correct. I want to be clear, there will be no break in service for users of Contact Scotland BSL whilst we retender for the free service. Now, there's clearly an issue here which I need to get to the bottom of, because if I'm getting it from both sides of the chamber, I better make sure that's absolutely watertight. But that's the commitment I'm giving to Parliament today, and because I've given Parliament that commitment today, that's what's going to have to happen.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Colette Stevenson.
Presiding Officer, when the previous Conservative government proposed closing FCDO operations in East Kilbride, I stood with the Labour Council leader against this bad decision, one which will remove 1,000 jobs from the town and have a negative impact on many employees who are settled there. The then Labour candidate for Westminster rightly said that taking away these jobs would cause much damage. However, the new Labour government has doubled down on this Tory plan, hoping to leave as soon as 2026. However, no updates from local Labour politicians have been forthcoming, given recent developments. Previous UK government figures suggest that ploughing ahead with this move could hurt East Kilbride's economy to the tune of £30 million. Can the First Minister confirm if the UK Government has discussed this with the Scottish Government and whether the Labour administration has shared an updated economic impact assessment for the cost of its abandonment to East Kilbride?
First Minister.
So first of all, let me express my thanks to the committed workforce at the FCDO in East Kilbride. They have a long history and long tradition of contributing towards international development activity from East Kilbride. It's been a source of great pride within that community and across Scotland. I'm not aware of any direct contact with the Scottish Government on this issue or any updated economic assessment, but I will, if there is any update required to Colette Stevenson on that point, I will make sure that is forthcoming to her, because we do value this employment and recognise its importance in the East Kilbride economy.
Pauline McNeill.
On Sunday, the 15th of December, the day of the Scottish Cup final, we witnessed appalling scenes of violence and disorder in the city centre of Glasgow, caused by groups of football supporters, not representative, of course, of the vast majority of football fans. So let me say firstly, I agree with the First Minister when he said in response to this that the clubs have a role to play in preventing this disgraceful behaviour. So we agree on that. But my question is, given the police are now trying to identify those responsible by the use of CCTV and social media footage, is the First Minister aware that CCTV cameras in Glasgow are no longer staffed 24 hours, 7 days a week? So before the 3 p.m. shift, that means you cannot zoom in or have detailed monitoring of disorder in real time. Now, I fully appreciate that the First Minister will say that you're not responsible for CCTV in Glasgow. But what I'm asking for is for the First Minister not to stay silent about this. And does he believe that Police Scotland need all the resources available to tackle crime, not only in relation to football events, but other crimes such as violence against women that often occur out with these hours? So does the First Minister agree? You may not be aware of this, I appreciate this.
Briefly, please.
It's an absolute scandal that Police Scotland were not consulted when Glasgow City Council removed 24/7. I would like the First Minister to agree with me on this. Thank you.
First Minister.
President Officer, I'll have to look into the specifics of the CCTV shift patterns, because it's not something for which I carry responsibility, so I'll have to explore that point. But on the substantive issue that Pauline McNeill puts to me, first of all, I want to make it clear that the overwhelming majority of the fans who attended the football match behaved perfectly well. This is a minority that we are talking about, and their behaviour has got to be addressed. It is just not acceptable for Christmas shoppers to have to go through what they went through on Saturday. And whether it's Christmas shopping or any other day, it's just not on. The clubs have got a role, the police have got a role. Police Scotland had the situation in the city centre, unpleasant as it was, entirely under control, and they adapted their operational planning to deal with the situation as it emerged. So I have every commendation for the police in the way they deployed their resources. But fundamentally, it is unacceptable for football fans, even a minority, to behave in the fashion they behaved on Sunday. There cannot be a repeat of that. The police will be planning to deal with all of that, but the clubs have got to take action, and those responsible have got to be apprehended.
David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Harlan and Wolff's deal with Navanta will save thousands of jobs, many of them at the Meffel Yard in my constituency. Will the First Minister join me in welcoming the deal, which will protect both the workforce and shipbuilding industry in Scotland?
First Minister.
Sir, I do welcome the very positive news that's come from the deal between Harland & Wolff and Navantia. This has come about with a great deal of engagement from the Deputy First Minister, trade unions, management and staff, and collaboration with the United Kingdom Government. It will obviously provide security and reassurance to employees at the Methil Yard in Mr Torrance's constituency, and also at the Arnish site in the Western Isles in the constituency of Dr Allen. So this is welcome news, and I'm delighted to see it.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure we're all looking forward to our festive break. I know I certainly am. But it's fair to say that there are many people across Scotland find Christmas and New Year a very difficult time of year, particularly those facing social isolation, loneliness, grief, depression or illness. We often see, unfortunately, huge spikes of domestic violence at this time of year, fuelled mostly by alcohol. So, as well as paying tribute to those frontline blue light workers that we all thank for their time and service, can we also pay tribute to the vast armies of volunteers in the third sector who, day in, day out, 24/7, 365 a year, will also be there to help people in times of need and trouble? And as we look into 2025, will he commit his government supporting the third sector as best we can, given that their work very often starts when other public services end?
First Minister.
President Officer, I happily associate myself with the remarks of Mr Green, who's given a very substantial contribution to the issues of mental well-being and support for individuals wrestling with social isolation and loneliness within Parliament, and I commend him for doing that. There are a whole range of different third sector organisations who provide invaluable support, and as First Minister I have the privilege to encounter many of them and to engage with them, and it's heartwarming to see the vital role that they perform within our society, and they will be doing so over the Christmas break when many of us will be appreciating some time of respite. So I do associate myself very much with Mr Green's remarks. I assure him that the Government's budget will be focused on supporting third sector organisations. They are a linchpin in the delivery of many of the interventions that we need to put in place to support the mental well-being of individuals. And obviously Parliament will consider these questions in the spring to make sure we have that support in place for these organisations.
Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Lilias Graham Trust, based in Thornhill near Stirling, has been a lifeline for families in Scotland for decades. Providing residential support and parenting capacity assessments was all part of their mission to help families on the edge of care who were impacted by adverse childhood experiences, trauma, social exclusion and poverty. On the 22nd of November, the decision was taken to wind up the Trust, and this vital residential facility will close its doors on the 31st of January, after having written to the Minister for Young People, Children and the Promise for support, which wasn't forthcoming. Now, given that the sustainability of services at this centre of the Scottish Government's commitment to keeping the promise is vital support given by third sector organisations such as the Lilias Graham Trust in improving the lives of children, families and communities at risk of disappearing altogether. So, First Minister, how can your government claim to keep the promise if it idly stands by and lets long-standing third sector organisations who are actually keeping it go to the wall?
First Minister.
I understand the sentiments that underpin Ros McCall's question, but I'm not familiar with the case that she puts to me about the Lilias Graham Trust, and I'm sure the Trust has made a significant contribution to supporting the well-being of children and young people. But there will, as is always the case in some of these areas, be changes to service provision that are driven by changes in the way in which we support families. For example, at the heart of the promise is a determination to try to keep families together and to avoid the separation of families. So there may be a shift in resources to put more resources into supporting families, to keep them together, and that would be consistent with the direction of policy within the promise, because that is fundamentally the core point in the promise. So there may be changes in service provision. If I look at the City of Glasgow, for example, there's been very significant changes in the way the City of Glasgow deploys its expenditure for care-experienced young people, because it has now shifted its balance away from provision that it provides to putting much more support into supporting families to stay together. So I'll look at the issues that Ros McCall raises with me today. I'll take counsel from the Minister for Children, Young People and Keeping the Promise, and I'll reply in writing to Ros McCall about the issues involved.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, my constituency has no banks. They've all deserted the communities I serve. At Springburn Town Centre, however, there's a Crown Post Office. It's an anchor tenant in the local shopping centre and provides a vital service to hundreds of customers every week. A strategy agreed by the UK Labour Government and being taken forward by the Post Office could axe this service and be a body below for financial inclusion and local regeneration plans. Can I ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government can help support areas like Springburn facing such challenges, and will he write to the UK Government, as I have done, urging them to halt this flawed process and to engage meaningfully with local communities and trade unions to ensure the Post Office can have a strong and vibrant future at the heart of Springburn?
First Minister.
Sir, I understand the importance of the point that Mr Doris puts to me, and I can confirm that the Minister for Public Finance, Ivan McKee, has written to the UK Government on this question. In the absence of banking facilities, the Post Office becomes central to the delivery of access to finance for individuals. And given the concerns that Mr Doris has raised, and there was a parliamentary debate on this subject, I think led by Mr Gibson the other day, which provides an illustration of the degree of parliamentary concern on this question. So I do confirm that we will, that letter has been written, and we will engage with the UK Government on trying to find a different approach to this flawed process.
Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I remind the Chamber of my register of interest, a director of a company with retail interests and a member of the trade union USDA. The First Minister may have read an article published 2 days ago on the BBC website highlighting a spiralling pattern of violence targeted against retail workers in my constituency. It detailed incidents of one business owner having a knife drawn on him, a customer hospitalised, a shop worker, a shop owner punched, and a store manager throttled. And these aren't isolated incidents. Last year alone, 5,500 incidents were recorded against the Protection of Retail Workers Act, which I took through Parliament, and that was a 46% increase in the rise of such incidents. So does the First Minister agree with me that greater priority needs to be given to community and response policing so that these crimes can be treated with the expediency and seriousness that these crimes undoubtedly are? And perhaps above all else, at this time of year, when many of us will be using the shops, does he agree with the Scottish Retail Consortium and USDA's campaign that we need to treat retail workers with kindness at Christmas?
First Minister.
I think we should treat retail workers with kindness 365 days a year, because the root of the issue that Mr Johnson raises is criminal conduct and the fact that people are not behaving appropriately. And whether that's about criminal conduct or disrespect to retail workers, it is part of the same pattern. So I agree with the sentiments that Mr Johnson puts to me. The Government has put into the budget £3 million as a specific intervention to tackle retail crime. This will be taken forward as a partnership between the retail sector and the police, and this will be in addition to an investment next year of a record £1.62 billion for policing, which is an increase of £70 million on 24-25, which I think provides the resources that enables us to have effective community policing, and I'm advised on that point by the Chief Constable of Police Scotland. And of course, all that we need to do is we need to pass that budget. And I just leave that message and that clarion call to Mr Johnson to be able to support the Government to make sure we can get on with tackling the legitimate issue that he puts to me by making sure the Government's budget is passed in February.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the Chamber and the public gallery to do so before the next item begins. The next item of business is portfolio questions, and at question number 1, I call Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent engagement its ministers have had with disabled people's organisations to discuss any concerns of disabled people.
Minister Cook-Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 13th of November, I met with the disabled people's organisations and opposition party members to discuss the Disability Equality Plan. Disabled people are struggling and change is urgently needed. We are determined to do everything we can to address the challenges faced by disabled people, and that's why the Scottish Budget has prioritised action to address these challenges, investing an additional £2 million into the plan. Following publication of the budget, I met with the disabled people's organisations on the 5th of December to discuss next steps, and I look forward to continuing our work together to build towards a fairer Scotland.
Paul O'Kane.
I thank the Minister for her answer. The Minister knows that I have raised concerns on the sufficiency of support being provided to disabled people in terms of the challenges that are faced across Scotland. And I know the Minister is trying to work cross-portfolio on these issues, but we do have to take cognizance of the fact that delays to the LDAN bill or the Disabled Young People's Transition Strategy have been very concerning, and most recently I've raised the issue of promised health checks to people who have learning disabilities not happening. I think disabled people and DPOs want to see a renewed focus to deliver on those concerns when we return from recess in the new year. So can I ask the Minister what concrete action can the disabled community expect in the new year, in 2025, to finally address in full those concerns I have mentioned and tackle a significant challenge faced, not least of which is a disproportionately high poverty rate?
Minister.
I thank Paul O'Kane for his interest, and I thank him for acknowledging the hard work that is going on in collaboration and in cooperation. We continue to do that. We are committed to delivering positive change for disabled people, as I have already mentioned, the £2 million to enhance the Disability Equality Plan in recognition of the work that is needed to improve disabled people's lives. We introduced the pension age disability payment, which is worth between £290 and £434 a month to people of state pension age and over who are disabled. The child winter heating payment will help households with severely disabled children manage the additional costs that they face this winter. We've also secured an agreement of energy suppliers, consumer organisations and the disabled people's organisations to co-design a social tariff mechanism to evidence its viability. And after recess, I will continue to work in collaboration cross-party and with the DPOs to advance further steps.
Thank you. Question number 2, Humza Yousaf.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide further details on the implementation of its social isolation and loneliness strategy, Recovering Our Connections 2023 to 2026, particularly in relation to urban areas.
Minister Cook-Stewart.
Thank you for the question. The Scottish Government acknowledges that loneliness is a public health issue that impacts people across Scotland. Our December budget confirmed funding in 2025-26 to support projects tackling social isolation and loneliness through our Social Isolation Loneliness Fund. The fund supports the delivery of our Social Isolation and Loneliness Delivery Plan, and we are providing £3.8 million over 3 years to 53 community projects across Scotland that provides opportunities for people to connect. 26 out of the 53 funded organisations are based in urban areas such as Edinburgh, Glasgow, to which the member has his constituency, Aberdeen, Stirling and Inverness.
Humza Yousaf.
Can I thank the Minister for a very detailed response? There are a number of excellent organisations and community groups in my constituency and, of course, indeed, right across Scotland that do so much to combat isolation, especially during the Christmas and festive period. There are too many to mention, quite frankly, in Glasgow Pollock. However, I will give a special mention to Swamp, Tea in the Pot, Govan Craft Cafe, and the many faith organisations and groups in my constituency. Does the Minister agree with me that local community organisations play a vital role in combating isolation and loneliness, often supporting people that other services cannot reach. And will she join me in congratulating the staff and, crucially, volunteers in my Glasgow Pollock constituency and right across Scotland for their invaluable service in helping to combat loneliness and isolation this Christmas and during the festive period?
Minister.
Thank you. I would agree with him, and he mentioned tea in the pot, and I'm aware that my Cabinet Secretary has in fact visited that excellent service. I would also like to thank the people of Pollock for their tenacity, resilience and community spirit. The Scottish Government and myself personally recognise the contribution made by community-based organisations in responding to brings positive changes to people's lives, and that's why this government remains a strong advocate for the third sector. We remain committed to empowering communities to do things for themselves and make their voices heard in the planning and delivery of services.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While Christmas is a happy time for many, for some it can be the most difficult and lonely time of the year. Social isolation services like befriending have been shown to greatly improve well-being. Can the Minister advise how the Scottish Government is ensuring people who need these services are offered them, including referrals from other public services like the NHS or schools?
First Minister. Minister.
Thank you for the question. We have identified priority groups for the Social Isolation and Loneliness Fund. For instance, young people, disabled people, people with a mental health condition, older people and people living in areas of deprivation or on a low income. Alongside members of the advisory group, we are analysing the impact of the Social Isolation and Loneliness Fund that has reached just over 11,000 people in year one. Our delivery plan also contains a number of actions aimed to stimulate activity across government and beyond that helps tackle the stigma associated with loneliness and provides opportunities for people to connect.
Question number 3, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to address wait times in temporary accommodation.
Mr Paul McLennan.
Increasing the supply of affordable and social housing is key to reducing the time spent in temporary accommodation. The proposed 2025-26 Affordable Housing Supply Programme budget of £768 million more than reinstates funding to 23-24 levels. Additional investment of £42 million in affordable housing this year has been targeted to 5 local authorities in the Central Belt, with sustained temporary accommodation pressures to increase the supply of social and affordable homes through acquisitions and bringing empty social homes back into use. We are also working with energy suppliers to address issues to ensure empty social homes can be turned around more quickly.
Graham Simpson.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer, but I'm sure he'll agree with me that some of the waiting times in temporary accommodation have been absolutely appalling. There was one case in South Lanarkshire where a child spent 420 days in temporary accommodation. There was an adult who endured a 760-day stay. That's just unacceptable. So, given that the First Minister earlier said we are not building enough houses, does the Minister agree with me that we need a better approach and that it actually should be targeted at those areas most in need?
Minister.
A few points. First of all, and I'll touch on some of the actions that we're taking. First of all, there was a capital budget cut last year from the Tory government, and I think that's an important part. We also had the freezing of the local housing allowance, so these are important contexts. I think in addition to the £42 million acquisition I talked about, there are other actions that this year's budget is looking at. £4 million for additional funding for homelessness provision, £2 million for empty homes initiatives, and we're also spending £90 million and continue to do so, even under this Labour government, in discretionary housing payment. To come back to the point I mentioned about the £768 million, that's going to produce 8,000 homes. We're also looking at, in terms of, well, and Mr Simpson knows this, and we've discussed this as well, is also about the housing bill and talking about prevention duties as well. So this government is taking a number of actions in regards to homelessness and will continue to do so.
Question number 4, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the benefits of the Scottish Welfare Fund for constituents in Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville.
The Scottish Welfare Fund provides an essential source of crisis support and helps people with independent living in Scotland. Last year, people in Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley benefited from nearly 1,800 community care grants, totalling over £765,000 and almost 3,500 crisis grants with a value of over £168,000. Those living in Mr Coffey's constituency will also benefit from the additional funding for East Ayrshire Council from the recently announced £20 million investment into the fund. This is on top of the £1.1 million funding already provided by the Scottish Government for the Council this year.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply? In 2023-24, over £1.3 million of Scottish Welfare Fund support came to East Ayrshire alone, benefiting my constituents during the worst of the cost of living crisis. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what role the Welfare Fund is due to play in the year ahead in the Scottish Government's priority mission to eradicate child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mr Coffey is quite right to point out to the important role that the Scottish Welfare Fund has within our benefits and support system, presiding officer, and it is a key priority for the Scottish Government to continue that essential source of support for those in crisis. But we also must do what we can to continue to press the UK Government to take the actions at source, such as an essentials guarantee, which would lift people out of poverty, would cure that systemic challenge that we have about the inadequacy of UK Government benefits, and therefore be able to ensure that the Scottish Government would have more flexibility about how we could use the Scottish Welfare Fund to support more people.
Question number 5, Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what levels of support are currently available to women experiencing domestic abuse.
Mr Cocab-Stewart.
Thank you. Domestic abuse is abhorrent. That is why we are providing record levels of funding to vital frontline services to support survivors. We fund Scotland's domestic abuse and forced marriage helpline to ensure round-the-clock specialist advice is available. Through our £19 million per year Delivering Equally Safe Fund, which I recently announced will be extended for another year, we support a range of organisations across Scotland to ensure that vital support to women and children is available locally. Our Victim-Centred Approach Fund will provide £18.5 million for specialist advocacy support for survivors between 2022 and 2025.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you. Can I thank the Minister for that answer? I know violence against women and girls is a priority for this Minister and, of course, the Scottish Government. The Minister will know, according to Police Scotland, between April and September 2024, the number of domestic abuse crimes have risen by 2,028 since last year. In addition to this, we know through Scottish Women's Aid that on average 25% of women who have suffered economic abuse report that it continues after leaving their abuser. And so with this in mind, what has the Government done or could be doing to protect and support the rising number of women who experience and survive domestic abuse with that particular experience of economic abuse after they leave?
Minister.
Well, as I said, domestic abuse is a total blight on our society, and we've had extensive discussions during the 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls. I acknowledge that there has been a small increase in the number of incidents that have been reported to the police, but we know that many of these crimes go unreported. I would encourage victims to seek help and support. We are continuing to make changes to the justice system to make it easier to report incidents, and we have legislated to give police, prosecutors and the courts greater powers to tackle domestic abuse crimes. We are also taking steps to address financial abuse, and that is quite clearly set out in our Delivering Equally Safe plan that is jointly delivered through partnership with stakeholders and with local authorities and the Scottish Government. And I'd also like to take the opportunity just quickly to highlight the £500,000 fund, the pilot that was the fund to leave. That provided financial support to women who were leaving an abusive relationship, and the assessment is nearly at the end stage, and I will be able to report back soon.
Thank you. I'm really keen to get in all members who have pressed and concise questions and responses would help in that regard, and I call Tess White.
Minister and Cabinet Secretary, I've been contacted by women's support services in my region about the devastating impact of Labour's national insurance hikes. One service estimates that it will cost £9,000 and their budgets are already cut to the bone. They've got waiting lists of 6 months or more. It will likely have to lose a practitioner, and the impact on survivors is going to be absolutely awful. So please, what action, and they are watching today for your answer on this, what action is the Scottish Government taking to ensure the sustainability of these vital services so that all survivors receive the vital support they need? Thank you.
Minister.
I'm aware of time, so I will be brief. I acknowledge that this is a massive impact on the third sector, and I think we would all appreciate if everyone in this chamber could join on pressing the UK Government to actually address their economic decisions which are having an impact.
Thank you. Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I share the concern of many of my constituents with the news that the Highland Council is considering plans to invite a single provider to deliver domestic abuse services for all genders across the Highlands. I know first-hand the invaluable levels of expertise and knowledge that exist within the women's groups in the Highlands, and any changes which could limit access to support for women in need require careful discussion. Can I therefore ask the Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that women in the Highlands and Islands can access specialised local domestic abuse services?
Minister.
The Scottish Government is committed to supporting frontline services that provide crucial support to survivors of domestic abuse. Through the Delivering Equally Safe, we fund local women's aid services in the Highlands, including Lochaber Women's Aid, Caithness and Sutherland Women's Aid, Inverness Women's Aid and Rothshire Women's Aid. The Scottish Government cannot interfere with local authority autonomy and procurement procedures, including the commissioning of domestic abuse services. We encourage local authorities to utilise the joint COSLA and Scottish Women's Aid guidance on good practice in commissioning specialist domestic abuse services.
Thank you. Question number 6, Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to tackle any fraud in Social Security Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
Social Security Scotland has a zero-tolerance approach to fraud. They have published a counter-fraud strategy and have counter-fraud response measures in place to proactively identify and tackle emergent fraud risks. Where Social Security Scotland have good reason to believe that fraud has taken place, they will investigate and make efforts to stop ongoing financial loss and will seek to recover payments. Where appropriate to do so, Social Security Scotland will make a report to the Crown Office in relation to cases of suspected fraud.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Scotland's Benefit Agency has referred just one person to prosecutors, despite receiving almost 8,000 allegations of fraud. And that one case was subsequently dropped. So much for a zero-tolerance approach. Surely the Cabinet Secretary must share my concern, and these figures should send alarm bells through government unless the Cabinet Secretary believes there is simply no fraud. So will she protect taxpayers' money and look at the robustness and staffing levels of the anti-fraud team?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I extend an invitation to the member to actually meet with Social Security Scotland to go through exactly what is in place? Because I appreciate the points and the figures that he has laid out. But I would say to him, it does not necessarily reflect that there is an issue in the system. And I think it would be useful, rather than what we can go through in the chamber, to talk through exactly what happens with the claims that come in around fraudulent activity, and exactly the very, very detailed processes around current fraud risk and the suspected fraudulent activity and what exactly happens. There is an enormous amount we could go into, Presiding Officer, around the investigative methodology and data analysis and the working with partners to approve the appropriate response for fraud. Not all will be something that should go to the Crown Office, but there is very, very stringent measures in place within the agency, and I would invite the member to meet with the agency to talk through this in details, and if indeed if he still has any concerns, I would be happy to discuss those with him in detail.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will agree it's vital to minimise any fraud, not just on Social Security Scotland, and be aware that the UK taxpayer was defrauded of tens of billions of pounds during the COVID pandemic, from dodgy personal protection equipment to some employers falsely claiming furlough payments. What cooperation has there been between the Scottish and UK governments in trying to recover this and money lost through tax evasion by wealthy individuals?
I'm not wholly content that that relates to the substantive question. So I think we will move on to question number 7, and I call Gordon MacDonald. Mr. Gibson, I have ruled, and I call Gordon MacDonald for question number 7.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the announcement in its draft budget 25-26 that it plans to mitigate the UK Government's two-child benefit cap policy in Scotland, what it estimates the cost will be of doing so per affected child.
Cabinet Secretary.
Universal Credit Child Element is currently worth £287.92 per month for the first 2 children in a household, and mitigation will seek to make a payment equal to the Universal Credit Child Element for each eligible third and subsequent child in a household impacted by the cap. At current levels, that would be almost £3,500 per child per year. CPAG, the Child Poverty Action Group, estimates that mitigating the 2-child limit in Scotland could lift around 15,000 children out of poverty.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Labour Government that promised change has left it to the devolved governments to mitigate the most pernicious and costly Tory austerity measures like the 2-child limit. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline the total cost to the Scottish Government of all the UK Government policies that are being mitigated, including the 2-child benefit cap?
Cabinet Secretary.
Next year in our draft budget, mitigating the impacts of UK Government policies will rise to over £210 million per year, an increase of over £56 million. This includes spending over £99 million on discretionary housing payments to mitigate the bedroom tax and the benefit cap, maintaining our £41 million commitment to the Scottish Welfare Fund, which provides crisis support and helps eligible people to establish independent living, and around £70 million above the block grant adjustments to mitigate the winter fuel payment cut, ensuring all pensioners' households will receive a minimum £100 of support next winter. And, Presiding Officer, I noted with some disbelief that only yesterday the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions seemed to suggest that despite this Parliament and this Government not having the powers, that somehow it's up to the Scottish Government to also alleviate the critical situation of the WASPy women. And once again, that is a deep disappointment and an abdication of the responsibility of the UK Government on this and indeed the other areas that we mitigate against.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, the Finance Cabinet Secretary said in her statement to the budget that there would be information required, data information required from the DWP before the Scottish Government could set a cost to this mitigation. Could the Cabinet Secretary for Social Security spell out exactly what data would be required and how that will be implemented for this policy?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we do need some additional information and data sharing with the DWP. That work has now begun with the DWP. Letters have been exchanged, and the officials from both Social Security Directorate within the Scottish Government and the DWP are now working with that. I would be happy to provide the data that we think is still required. It may still change because we are working through that, and we are in essence in the first sprint of the discovery phase for what needs to happen on that. So with the caveat that it may change with that discovery work, I'd be happy to provide Liz Smith with that information.
Question number 8, Claire Howie.
To ask the Scottish Government how the measures announced in its draft budget 2025-26 will support its mission to eradicate child poverty.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Budget for 25-26 prioritises action to eradicate child poverty, outlining wide-ranging investment to support progress on this national mission. In addition to our continued investment in measures such as the Scottish Child Payment, early learning and childcare and free bus travel, we have announced increased investment in the affordable housing supply and the expansion of breakfast clubs and free school meals. Importantly, we have also committed to spend £3 million to develop the systems necessary to effectively scrap the impact of the two-child cap in 2026, and CPAG estimate that scrapping the two-child limit in Scotland could lift 15,000 children out of poverty.
Claire Howie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Poverty campaigners have made clear that for child poverty to be eradicated in Scotland, policymakers cannot work in a silo. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the First Minister's 4 priority missions support one another, and how the draft budget ensures low-income households in Scotland are set to benefit not only from more generous and comprehensive social security than the rest of the UK, but also from a thriving green economy and improved public services?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Claire Hockey is quite right to point out that with the eradication of child poverty being a defining mission of this government, it is not just for this portfolio, but indeed for all ministers to take exceptionally seriously, which is why we have the cross-government response that we do, and I believe that the budget demonstrates that, presiding officer, whether we see that through the investment in employability, whether we see that in the investment in housing, or indeed in social security, where we have the universal winter fuel payment being reintroduced, and that work for the two-child cap. That's a small but significant sample of the work that's in that budget. But, presiding officer, that support for people will only happen if this budget is passed and if Parliament votes for it. So the important work that we are all obligated to do to eradicate child poverty can only be done if the budget is passed by Parliament.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions, and we move to decision time. And there are no questions to be put as a result of today's business, so I'll take this opportunity to wish all members and all staff in Parliament a very merry and peaceful Christmas. And we will now move on to members' business in the name of Pam Gossel. Thank you.
Okay, and the final item of business this afternoon is members' business debate on motion 14155 in the name of Pam Gossel on repairing potholes on Scotland roads. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Pam Gossel to open the debate. Around 7 minutes. Ms Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to bring Chamber business to a close today. Before I begin, I would like to thank all the organisations for providing briefings for today's members' business. I would also like to thank all the MSPs who have chosen to speak in my members' business today, as well as those who have kindly stayed behind. And I'm sure we're all waiting to get out of here and enjoy our Christmas holidays. So I will try my best to keep my remarks short. The presence of potholes is one of the most frustrating parts of driving, and I know because I have been driving for over 30 years, I can certainly say that, like many others in here, I have also been cursed by the potholes many times. Potholes, as we all know, are often caused by weather conditions such as heavy rain, freezing temperatures, something Scotland is no stranger to. Potholes can cause excessive damage to cars through tyre damage, exhaust damage, suspension damage, wheel damage and bent rims and much more. Potholes are more than capable of causing car accidents. Whether going through the pothole or avoiding the potholes, especially when verging to the other side of the road. Not only is this dangerous but also illegal. This means that drivers are often left to decide whether to break the law or damage their vehicle. Research brought forward by the Scottish Conservatives has shown that from this fiscal year 2021 to 2022 to fiscal year 2023 to 2024, the number of potholes reported to councils increased by 15%, from 94,356 to 108,256. In my area of East and West Dunbartonshire, drivers reported 2,463 potholes and 1,875 potholes, respectively, for 2023 to 2024. In fact, Great Western Road, which partially crosses through my area, was found to be one of the worst roads in Scotland for potholes. The frustration with potholes is something that often comes up through constituent correspondence, surgeries and at the doors when speaking to constituents in East and West Dunbartonshire who have expressed their anger at the lack of action. It is estimated that it could cost a total of £2.6 billion to fix Scotland's roads from potholes, while more than £4 million has been paid out for pothole damage by local authorities since 2019.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to my friend for giving way, but does she also accept that this situation is going to get worse because of the additional weight of electric vehicles, cars, buses, other vehicles, vans, which is just going to exacerbate the problem? Does she agree?
Pam Gosling.
I absolutely agree with my colleague. Things are going to get worse, and that's why we're having this debate today, so that the Scottish Government can let us know what their plans are moving forward. I recently read the story of Lisa Mackay. Lisa is a bilateral amputee who was crossing a road in Paisley in the rain. As she was approaching a dropped kerb, her wheelchair clipped a pothole that was filled with water. As a result, Lisa came right off her chair and landed full impact on her right stump, where she passed out. She was then taken to the Royal Alexandra Hospital, where she was treated for fractures to her leg. This comes to show that potholes and bad road conditions do not only affect drivers but also pedestrians, and particularly those in wheelchairs. As mentioned earlier, bad weather can lead to the creation of potholes. As we are all going through winter months now, we can only expect road conditions to get worse. Unfortunately, our local authorities do not always have the necessary resources to repair their roads. Research obtained by SPICE has shown that the percentage of local government allocation as percentage of total Scottish Government spending has dropped from 29% in 2014 to 2015 to 23% in 23 to 2014, and more recently to 21.4% in the latest Scottish budget for 2025 to 2026. Will I get any extra time?
Yes.
No.
John
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I thank the member for giving way. She says that local government need more money, so could she perhaps explain, should that money come off, say, the NHS, or should it come from higher taxes, which her party opposes?
Pam Gosling, and give you the time back.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think to respond to the member, it's very important to understand that we're sitting over here in opposition. It's your government that's in that position to tell us what you're doing. But also, if you stop wasting money...
Through the chair, please. Through the chair.
To be honest, I think we can spend more with our local authorities. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let's now talk about SNP government's track record when it comes to neglecting drivers, starting with the disastrous Butte House Agreement. By going into coalition with the Greens, an anti-driver and anti-roads party in 2021, Nicola Sturgeon chose to put support for independence above the needs of motorists, particularly in rural areas. The Greens are so radical on this issue, with Lorna Slater once saying, "Cars are not safe for people or for the planet," and even called for a ban on car advertisements. In fact, just yesterday, Lorna Slater held a members' business on banning cars from Holyrood Park. Her co-leader, Patrick Harvie, pledged to shift billions of pounds in this parliamentary session away from road building. The only good thing Hamza Yousaf did as First Minister was to get rid of the Greens from government. A few months ago, we found out that the SNP government had spent £16 million on consultancy fees for the A83 Rest and Be Thankful. Yet the road has mostly been closed to a two-way traffic since August 2020. The A83 crosses through my area, with many of my constituents expressing their frustration for this delay. The Scottish Conservatives are the only party standing up for motorists, whether it is being to repair potholes, upgrade key trunk roads. Many times in this chamber, we have called upon the SNP government to stop dragging their feet and get on with the job of upgrading key roads, including the A96, A9, A75, A77 and A83. In closing, Presiding Officer, here is to hoping that SNP ministers listen to motorists rather than looking at the crazy proposals such as charging drivers £15 a day to drive cars into towns and cities. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call for Stuart McMillan to be followed by Carol Mochan. Around 4 minutes, Mr McMillan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, first I want to thank Pam Gossel for securing this debate and the last one of the year in the Chamber. Now, thinking of Christmas, I'm sure that many drivers across Scotland have made their Christmas wish for all the potholes across the country to be repaired. But I can't comment on the council roads in East Dunbartonshire that Pam Gossel has got indicated in her motion. But I'm going to focus upon the trunk roads in my own constituency. Now, during the pandemic, Amy took over the maintenance of the South West trunk roads maintenance contract for the A8 and the A78. Now, Amy have been a breath of fresh air. Now, it's not just in relation to the greater investment in the network over the past 2 years, but also the engagement that I've actually had with them. My staff have had with them too. As highlighted in my general question earlier today, that most of the near 5 miles of trunk road between Partley and Port Glasgow and the building roundabout in Greenock in both directions have been resurfaced over the past 2 years. There's also been resurfacing projects on the A78. Now, this has been welcomed by my constituents. However, when resurfacing significant stretches of roads does take place, whether it's in my area or anywhere else in the country, roadworks are going to be unavoidable, and sometimes that can cause some frustrations with drivers, especially as, certainly locally, some felt as if there were too many roadworks at the one time. However, this wasn't always the fault of Amy. It was a mix of the situation that they inherited, as well as the year-long Scottish Water Flood Investment Project along the A8, which is something that I led the campaign for. So I was delighted to actually see investment going into the road infrastructure and also the flooding infrastructure within my constituency. So I'm not going to suggest that there are no potholes in Inverclyde, quite the contrary, because there are. But the reality is that I receive more complaints about the length of time it takes to travel, to drive from Wemyss to Port Glasgow, as compared to what I get with regards to potholes. Now, that wasn't always the case, because certainly Inverclyde has got 2 trunk roads, A78 and A8, and those are the main arteries of my area. Certainly, just on the local aspect once again, I mean, only a couple of months ago I held a round-table meeting with regards to the road infrastructure and pavement infrastructure we have. And Inverclyde Council were there, Amy were there, as well as bus operators and folk from ScotRail and Network Rail, just to give some examples. And this was because of the example that Pam Goss was talking about a few moments ago with regards to constituents who might be disabled. This was raised, the specific points were raised with me. So get folk in the room, around a table, to try to have that dialogue to try to make things better and improve the outcomes for all the constituents in my constituency. My challenge to Amy and others in charge of maintaining the roads is to actually keep on top of the maintenance. So in addition, my office staff and I regularly will report some of the smaller defects to Amy. And Inverclyde Council used to have its own app, and it was a great tool to actually go and highlight this stuff, but they've stopped that app. But they're looking at something else. But certainly, if people report things timorously to Amy, then they have shown and they have proven they are going out to get these things fixed in a very quick fashion, which is something I warmly welcome. So returning to Pam Gossell's motion and the aspect regarding local authority roads, I do note that Pam Gossell's challenge to the Scottish Government, and also the Minister will reply obviously on behalf of the Scottish Government, but I gently say to Pam Gossell, the Scottish Government are proposing in the budget to provide local authorities with an extra £1 billion. Now, I would urge Pam Gossell to support the budget and lobby local authorities in the West Scotland region to spend more money on roads. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that we would like to see more invested in roads. We'd like to see more invested in many policy areas. But this Parliament has got limited powers. It's got limited financial powers. And with that limited budget, then this Parliament has got political choices to make. Now, I'm not sure if Pam Gossell had lobbied her previous UK Conservative Government for additional resources for this Parliament to be spent on roads. However, if we didn't need to wait for the block grant every year, then maybe our situation would be somewhat different. So just to conclude with, Presiding Officer, I do want to put in my record my thanks to all the staff who work in the trunk roads and also local authority roads daily. They will be out over the festive period in all weather conditions, working to keep our roads safe. And I wish them and everyone in the chamber today and all my constituents a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by Tess White, around 4 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Pam Gossell for bringing this debate to the Chamber and, of course, allowing us all to speak in the last debate of 2024. I think it is fair to say that most of us agree potholes on Scotland's roads is an issue raised with us by many of our local constituents. If you knock doors, do street surgeries, or generally if you're in your local co-op, people stop you and they believe we should be dealing with potholes. Constituents definitely put this at or near the top of the list of what they would like to see improved in their local community. And I don't think that's just anecdotal evidence at all. The fact is that it is backed up by other evidence. We've heard some in the Chamber today. I want to pay tribute to my colleague Alec Rowley for his work earlier in the year, where he obtained some figures from Freedom of Information about the estimated cost of the fixing the country's local roads in 2024, and it had risen to at least £2.5 billion, and that was despite 4 councils not providing data. In my own home council, East Ayrshire, there were bills totalling £67,000. And the neighbouring South Ayrshire Council £42,500. And I would argue that this is pothole repair, not investment in our transport structure. It's more patching up and hoping that there will be a quick fix. And I think that is some of the frustration that our constituents have. People are frustrated not only because of the potholes themselves, but it's also the time taken to repair. For example, in South Ayrshire, it was reportedly 295 days taken to complete a work instruction for a repair in a local pothole. And what members of the public tell me is that they are actually fed up reporting it, as it feels as if nothing is ever done, and if it is done, that it's quite a temporary fix and it breaks down quite quickly. It feels like preventable maintenance is gone. Things like drains and verges, water on the surfaces of the road. There's nothing there to ensure the longer-term functioning of our road network, and that definitely frustrates members of the public. I want to also mention pavements, because I think this is an ever-increasing complaint about the safety of pavements because of the deterioration and potholes on pavements. And these are very dangerous for users of wheelchairs, people with visual impairment. And I think it adds to the sense of disappointment in communities that us as politicians, about the way we view the look and safety of our roads and streets for people. Of course, there's reports from places such as the RAC on how motoring users have put this as the very top of their priority list now, and that, I think, was the first time that potholes has been at the top of that list. But I'm conscious of time. I want to just make 2 points in closing, Presiding Officer. Firstly, in researching this debate, the standard line from the Scottish Government is it's the responsibility of local government. But I think if we are absolutely honest, we do know that local government is on its knees in terms of funding. And understandably, local government are prioritising frontline services. As a government, so there does need to be some recognition about the impact potholes have on our constituents, and some honesty around how we might be able to help local government. And that would help with us in opposition continuing to try and put pressure and scrutiny on you on this. My second point, Presiding Officer, though, is that, in truth, I think we need to think more about this debate in terms of sustainable transport. And, of course, transport is part of that community health that we often talk about. We must seek to come up with solutions around lessening the load on our roads and have a future where we have connected travel with trains and buses and good paths to walk, and an opportunity to be less reliant on cars, because our journey is almost impossible if we don't have a car. So I think that is an important part to think about in the way in which we invest in the infrastructure around transport, including roads in Scotland. But can I close by thanking members for being in the debate, and of course, like others, wish everyone, including our constituents, a really good festive period. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call Tess White to be followed by Ben McPherson, around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Many Scots will be driving to visit family and friends over Christmas, and the RAC has warned that in the next few days it will be the busiest festive travel period in a decade. With such a high volume of motorists on the road network, I thank Pam Gossall for securing the time to debate the pothole emergency this afternoon. And it is an emergency. It's one of those topics that people say, what are you talking about? What's your last debate? You go, potholes, and you go, potholes? You say, well, actually, everybody at the moment has a pothole story, either themselves or their family. So it is an issue, and it's an emergency right now. And it's an issue that's consistently being raised by constituents across the North East. Potholes are a menace. They're costing millions of pounds to cash-strapped councils, and they're costing drivers hundreds of pounds in repairs, and it's during a cost of living crisis, so they feel it even more. They can cause burst tyres, engine issues, and even collisions. They can affect lives and livelihoods. Earlier this week, when I said I'd got a speech on potholes, one constituent told me that her son had written off his car driving from Carnoustie to Arbroath after going over a pothole at night. She said he couldn't see it, and his car was written off. Fortunately, he was lucky and survived, but too many other drivers and cyclists have been badly injured because of road defects. Unfortunately, Presiding Officers, our councils are trying to make up for the shortfalls in funding, and they're having to magic up money for repairs they simply don't have. Will I get the time back? Thank you.
Douglas Lumsden.
I thank Tess White for taking the intervention. I thank Tess White for taking the intervention. She'll be well aware in Aberdeen City Council just now, the SNP administration are trashing the city centre by bus gates and low emission zones. Does the member agree with me that that potentially could be a source of funding for the local council could use to actually repair the roads from penalising drivers just trying to get into the city centre?
Tess White, and I can give you the time back.
I mean, just a quick response. Yes, they could, but I think motorists, as my colleague will know, don't want to feel badly let down by their having to pay millions for parking fines and those sorts of things, and they do feel extremely concerned about it. So it is a balance. Yes, councils need to find funds, but I would actually say they need support. There is a pothole fund. They do need support, more support from the Scottish Government. So we know that local governments have been chronically underfunded by this SNP government. My colleague talks about Aberdeen City Council. Aberdeenshire Council manages and maintains a whopping 3,467 miles of road, and it's forking out huge sums for bridge maintenance, including our Boyne, Dinnet and Banff bridges. And I've been told the repair costs are in the millions of pounds, and it's just not sustainable. SSEN, they've proposed this mega pylon pathway in the northeast, which will also affect our roads. Heavy machinery and lorries will do enormous damage to ageing road assets. And who's going to cover the bill? Who's actually thinking about it? And who's going to cover this bill? Storms and heavy rainfall only make matters worse, further deteriorating the condition of roads. The road at Marykirk completely fell away in Storm Babette and took several months to fix. The road between Marykirk and Montrose and the bridge between St Cyrus and Montrose was out for months. Presiding Officer, the SNP government says that it's up to local authorities to decide how to spend their budgets, but they can't be expected to do more with less. And how far can you stretch an elastic band with a massive backlog in road repairs which could cost billions to remedy? It's motorists, motorcyclists and cyclists who are paying the price of the SNP's contempt for drivers. But, Presiding Officer, while funding is a huge problem, we need to look at, as well at the process for repairing potholes. A quick patch might be cost-effective, but it isn't long-lasting. Finally, response times are also key after pothole is reported. It can take days, sometimes even months, and sometimes years for the necessary repairs to be completed, meaning drivers are having to swerve or go slow to avoid them. Any changes in driver behaviour like that will cause accidents. With lives at risk, councils must have the resources to properly repair roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. I now call Ben McPherson to be followed by Douglas Ross. Around 4 minutes, Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And first of all, also commend Pam Goso for bringing this important issue to the Chamber. And I would just want to start off by saying, of course, this is an issue across the UK, and indeed the research that is cited in the motion by Pam Goso from the RAC is about roads across the UK, and all the parties that have spoken so far in this debate have been empowered in one form or another in different parts of the UK. So this is a collective issue, and here is an MSP from the SNP on their feet speaking about motorists, so I hope that gives some reassurance. And I want to speak about urban roads, representing the most densely populated urban area of Scotland, of Edinburgh, Northern and Leith. Quite rightly in this Parliament there is much discussion about our national roads, our important A roads and motorways. And urban roads, and others have spoken about rural roads, are of course the responsibility of local authorities primarily. But I do think it's important for those of us who represent our constituencies to be able to talk about the issues for motorists in our area. For example, Lower Granton Road, that goes along Wardie Bay in my constituency, handles more traffic in a year than the A9. And yet, being able to advocate on behalf of my constituents for the appropriate investment in that area is a position that obviously I argued to the Council about, but it's of relevance in our capital city to the Scottish Government as well, even though it's not fully responsible. Whether it's that road or others across my constituency, the challenge of the quality and the maintenance and the integrity of our urban roads is a challenge across the UK. And part of that is because we're in a position of repair. And that's what is highlighted rightly in the motion, The challenge of potholes is about repair, and the reason potholes occur is partly to do with the weather. But a lot of the time it's because of the integrity of the road has been weakened by utility companies doing various works that they need to do. And one of the issues that the Conservative Cameron government considered after the financial crisis was whether to create a duty across the UK on energy companies and other utility companies to better coordinate their works. And the then UK government backed away from that idea because utility companies opposed the position and said that they would simply pass on that cost to consumers. And, of course, in the financial crisis, people were impacted. There was a recession. Just like now, we have a cost of living crisis. But that's the main issue in urban Scotland, why we get potholes. And my constituents write to me regularly, sick, including roads near here, sick of it seeing dug up one month by one company and then dug up the next month by another company and then a few months later dug up by another company, and the inconvenience that causes for drivers, but also the weakening of the road that creates. So, yeah.
Douglas Lumsden. Person for taking intervention. I completely agree with the utility companies, and they're probably not fulfilling what they're meant to do in terms of the repairs after. When I was a councillor, one of the big issues we had was that there was not enough actual road inspectors to inspect, the works after these utility companies had done what they wanted to do, and it almost felt a false economy that councils were stripping these back. Does he agree with me that that's a role that we should be sort of maintaining as much as possible to make sure the utility companies are fixing the roads properly once they've done their work?
Ben McPherson, give you the time back.
That's an important point, and there is a general duty to coordinate works when it comes to roads, set out in Section 118 of the New Roads and Streetworks Act 1991. And the Scottish Roadworks Commissioner has been given more powers to issue a compliance notice if they think there's a breach of this general duty under the Transport Scotland Act 2019. But I actually think, and I say this constructively to the government, but as I said, this is a UK-wide issue, particularly as many of the utility companies are regulated under reserved legislation. Until we get on top of this issue of coordination, we're really going to struggle, and we're always going to be patching up our roads. We want to get to a place where, as they do in other countries, if utility companies want to do works, they have to do it together, because there is a duty on them to then relay the whole road so that the integrity is maintained. And luckily, just lastly, Presiding Officer, in Scotland, and I'll send this to the Minister in case it's helpful, we have a company called Prosemix, who I met in the summer. I met their CEO, Ian Ritchie. I think that's his correct title. And they're a software company who manage the coordination of utility works in New York City. So they already have the software, and it needs politics, it needs leadership, it needs permits, and it needs penalties, because utility companies don't want to coordinate because it's inconvenient for them. So perhaps some engagement with this Scottish company and some collective determination, if we can pull that together, then we can get to a better position where hopefully we have less potholes to repair in the future.
Thank you. I now call Douglas Ross. Around 4 minutes, Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Pam Gosal for lodging this motion and her excellent speech opening today's debate. Murray Council is an area that suffers, like many others, with potholes in our local roads, and I know the Council are always seeking to fill these potholes as quickly as possible, but as one's filled, another is created. Can I follow on from the point made by Ben McPherson about utility companies? Because I had complaints last month in Murray about the number of roadworks across our area, so I contacted the Council to ask how many incidents of roadworks have occurred in Murray this year. And from the 1st of January this year until the 14th of November, when they responded to me, there have been almost 5,000 roadworks registered with the Council. Of that 5,000, 3,500 are utility companies doing work that is needed, but that causes disruption on our local roads. A further 1,350 are local council works. And that is a huge amount of disruption for local travellers in the area. And I do think we need more joined up working with our utility companies and with our councils to minimise that disruption for our constituents. Other members have mentioned trunk roads, and I was very keen to get on the right side of you, Presiding Officer, and I know there is a line in here. This debate is not all about potholes, so I do want to spend the rest of my time today speaking about the A96, and in particular the issues that we have at the Union Bridge in Keith. And I mean absolutely no disrespect to the Minister, but I had hoped today the Cabinet Secretary would be responding to this transport debate about roads. And I do mean no disrespect to him, but we know that Fiona Hislop was in the chamber for FMQs and she left before this debate, because my points are directly to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, and I hope they will be passed on by the Minister. Because I've raised the issue about the traffic lights on the A96, the trunk road between Inverness and Aberdeen, that have been causing huge disruption to constituents in Keith, but also to businesses in Keith. Now, I asked Fiona Hislop to come to Keith to hear the concerns of local businesses, and she refused. And maybe that was personal. Maybe she just didn't want to accept my invitation. But I was copied into an email last night from Linda Gorn, who's the chair of United Keith, who had written in similar terms to Fiona Hislop asking her to come to Keith to see the impact these roadworks are having on the area. That letter was sent by Linda Gorn on the 18th of October. And, on the 22nd of October. On the 18th of December, she finally got a response. And do you know what? It wasn't from Fiona Hislop, despite the letter going to Fiona Hislop. It was from her permanent secretary. A civil servant took 2 months to respond, and his response was, Fiona Hislop's too busy. Diary pressures mean she cannot come to the north of Scotland to hear about the impact it is coming. I'm sorry, that is not acceptable. And I am urging in this debate, and I will in a follow-up letter, Fiona Hislop to finally get out of the Central Belt, to come up to Murray, to visit Keith and see the impact this is having on her area. I will give way to the Minister. Yes.
Minister. I cannot answer for the individual point that you've just made around Keith, but I would strongly and strenuously defend Fiona Hislop's responsibility and her actions in getting around the country. She has been all over Scotland at very many issues around transport right across the country, and I don't think you're representing her. My apologies. I don't think the member is representing her properly in that last statement.
I would remind the member, and he has attempted to address the fact that I might have concerns about relevance. Those concerns are growing. This motion is largely around potholes. So, Mr Ross, if you could use your creativity to try and link what you're saying to the substance of the motion, that would be helpful, and I can give you the time back.
Well, I will, because another line is the Scottish Government has to take meaningful action to repair Scotland's roads, including the A96 at the Union Bridge in Keith. And on the point the Minister has just made, I believe I'm backed up by facts, because I actually put in a written parliamentary question to Fiona Hislop asking when she last travelled on the A96, and it was over 6 months ago. So I think the time has come for her to travel on the A96 again, to come to Keith to visit these businesses. And today I will be presenting to the Minister, after this debate, a petition signed by over 350 local people and businesses urging urgent action on this road to get these repairs completed, to get the traffic lights removed, because at the moment there is a concern that this is costing businesses in Keith, because people are avoiding the area, £50,000 to £60,000 every month. This needs the urgent attention of Amy as the operating company, but it also has to be taken on board by the government. So I will present this petition on behalf of local people to the Minister, which I hope he will hand on to the Cabinet Secretary later on today. And I urge once again Fiona Hislop to come and meet the people of Keith who are suffering because of these ongoing works. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Yeah, I would remind the Chamber about the use of props. You might get away with it once, but waiving it for a second time, I think, probably is stretching it. I now call on the Minister to wind up the debate around 7 minutes. Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And in the spirit of the season of goodwill, I very much want to wish you, Presiding Officer, a very merry and peaceful Christmas to you, your family, and a very happy and healthy New Year. But I also want to put on record my sincere thanks to all the people in this place who make the jobs of us who are absolutely privileged to be here to represent our constituents
who get things done, make this place work and allow us to get on with the job that we're here to do. So I would like to extend that to everyone. I would also like to thank Pam Gosso for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber. Because it is an important debate, and the fact that she mentioned one of her constituents earlier on absolutely outlines the fact why this is an important debate. So I would in no way minimise what it is that I am going to contribute to the debate. But I want to make it clear that we absolutely appreciate there are challenges facing road maintenance across the network for both trunk and local roads, and we acknowledge the importance of those safe, well-performing roads are absolutely essential. Not just to the health of our people, but also to the health of Scotland's economy. And as members are aware, the Scottish Minister are responsible for the management and the maintenance of the strategic trunk road network, while in accordance with the Roads Scotland Act 1984, local roads clearly fall under the responsibility of the relevant local authority. And I know that members don't like to hear that, but these are the facts. Because it's important to make that distinction, as only the funding for the maintenance of the trunk road network, which makes up around 6% of Scotland's overall road network, is directly controlled by the Scottish Government. The vast majority of funding to local authorities from Scottish Government is provided via the block grant, and we do not stipulate how local authorities should utilise their individual allocations. And nor do I think any member on this side of the chamber or this side of the chamber would be comfortable if it was the Scottish Government that was making these stipulations. The vast majority of funding, as I say, comes from the block grant, so therefore it is the responsibility of each local authority to manage their own budget and to allocate the financial resources available to them on the basis of their local needs and their priorities, having first fulfilled their statutory obligations and the jointly agreed set of national and local priorities. So, first of all, let me turn to the maintenance of our trunk road network. The operating companies who maintain the trunk road network on behalf of the Scottish Government have a contractual obligation to inspect the network on at least a weekly basis, and they make any necessary repairs within a very strict timescale. And the Scottish Government fully funds the inspection and repair of all of those serious defects which could present a hazard to road users on the motorway and the trunk road network. To support this, the total investment in safety operating and maintenance of the trunk road network has increased by over 30% to a record level of over £683 million in years 24 to 25, and this is planned to increase by a further 4.5% in 25 to 26 to over £714 million. The increased budget for the trunk road network safety, adaptation, operation and maintenance enables the Scottish Government to meet all the contractual and legal commitments, as well as the supporting the wider commitments on road safety, air quality and climate adaptation. As I stated earlier, local road maintenance is the responsibility of local authorities, who allocate resources based on their priorities. Now, the Scottish Government is providing over £15 billion in the years 25 to 26 to the local government settlement, and that's an increase in resources available to local government of £1 billion. That's equivalent to a 7.2% cash terms increase, which is a 4.7% increase in real terms. The Independent Accounts Commission recently confirmed that the Scottish Government has provided a real terms increase to local governments in this year of 23-24 and 22-23. And again, I emphasise it's for the local representatives to decide how to best deliver for their own communities. And there is not a dedicated pothole fund. It's important to note that any Barnett consequences arising from Westminster spending is added to the Scottish bloc as a whole, and the Scottish ministers will decide how best to allocate those resources. As part of that process, consideration is given to what support can be provided to help improve road conditions where that is required. I will give way, yeah.
Stephen Kerr.
I'd be grateful if the Minister would address the issues that were raised, I think, really well by Ben Macpherson and Douglas Ross about what is weakening the integrity of our roads. And can I also ask him the point that I raised with Pam Gosel? The impact of the increased use of electric vehicles is only going to make this problem worse, and therefore would he expect that we're going to have to continue to increase the amount of money we're spending on road repairs because of the impact of EVs?
Minister, and give you the time back.
I very much take on board the points that Stephen Kerr raises, and I was really interested to hear the points that Ben McPherson was making. I am very much looking forward to hearing the Procemex, I think is the name of the company. I'll very much look forward to hearing what it is that this company does. I'm more than happy to engage in that. But the point that has been made in terms of utility companies, I think is absolutely correct in my own constituency. We had gas, electricity, telephone communications, all done at different times, all reducing the integrity of the road. And I think there needs to be some kind of conversation around what can we actually do to make sure that these things are done in a way that doesn't damage the integrity. I will take your intervention, Ben McPherson, that doesn't damage the integrity of the road, and that there is a responsibility to repair these roads to the standard that they should be. So I'll take that intervention now.
Ben McPherson.
I'm grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention and also for his points that he's just made. I do think if there's convening power that the Minister and the Scottish Government can bring together with the Commissioner and COSLA, for example, that would be warmly welcomed by all representatives and all the citizens of Scotland if improvements can be made in this regard. Minister.
I will very much take that on board, and I will write to the member, and we can have a look and have a conversation about what is the next steps. But that kind of takes me on to my next point, because we have a long history of working with local authorities and bodies such as COSLA to make sure that council finances are sustainable and that there are available resources that can meet their commitments. But it's not just about money. I think Ben McPherson and others are absolutely correct. It's not just about how much money it is. It's are we doing the right thing at the right time. So let's have a conversation about what that looks like. The Scottish Government will always seek to ensure that Scotland continues to receive the high-quality public services that we all expect. But I have to say, no, I'm going to keep the politics out of it. It's the season of goodwill, so I'm going to leave it there. I will... Sorry? Yeah, okay. I will conclude, Presiding Officer, by saying that I very much take the points on board that has been made by Pam Gossel, by other members of the Chamber. I'm more than happy to have that conversation with Ben McPherson, and thank you to Carol Mochan, and for everybody for actually spending time on the last day of term, just before Christmas, to come and take part in this debate. I think it's been a very good debate. I think it's been a constructive debate, and I wish everybody a very happy festive season. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate. Can I add my congratulations to all those who have shown the stamina to make it all the way through to the final debate of 2024. Wish you all a very Merry Christmas, a happy, healthy 2025. And with that, I close this meeting of Parliament.